This is the Truth Frequency Radio Network. We are TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
The grand deception as matrix is all-encompassing, consuming, and broad-reaching, yet so covert in imposition, it is largely unnoticed by those born into its nurturance. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed, and I thank those of you that have taken the time to join us this evening for fellowship and discourse and discussion and just going down the rabbit hole together. And as always, I have as co-host with me this evening, Kathy Dunson. Kathy, are you there, sister?
I am. Good evening, everybody.
Well, I'm so glad to be able to come to everybody without any interruptions, hopefully, God willing. But today we have as guests with us Michael Reynolds, and most of you might be familiar with his work on YouTube. His channel is P-Brane. Michael, are you there, brother?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to join us this evening. I think what we're going to be discoursing on and talking about when we get to that portion of the show is going to really help a lot of people make sense of what is really still a major conundrum, and that even individuals like Dr. Sungenis, he won't buy into the flat earth as model for world completely, or that the earth is, a flat plane, because he's not able to make sense of why it is that these star trails in the southern latitudes seemingly go in opposite direction. And so we'll talk about that. We'll also make mention of why it is that we have a celestial ecliptic as well, and why it is that the sun converges or approaches the horizon during sunrise and sunset. And all of these things have to do with perspective. And so let me get you to comment on that, and then I'll get you to give out where people can find your work, any websites that you have, contact that you'd like to share, anything of that nature.
I don't have a website. I just have my YouTube channel. And the understanding perspective and how the celestial bodies, would rise and set is key, because that was the reason I have such an interest in that myself, is that was my first objection when I heard about the flat earth. I was like, okay, I heard about the Joshua passage that says God stopped the sun. So I was like, okay, then the sun's moving. I get that. And then, but my problem was visualizing, but how does the sun rise and set? That doesn't make sense. So I started looking into perspective and thinking about it a lot, and that's how that's my a lot of my videos have to do with that, because that was my issue. So,
well, I'm really grateful for the work that you've done, and even though you haven't put out a lot of the videos, the ones that you have are very powerful and very helpful with regard as to helping people to convey and to understand these things and how to, picture them in mind. Kathy, let me ask you, because you weren't familiar with his videos and his work, and in looking at the two that we shared, what did you think about it as far as an outside perspective?
Actually, I think his anti-crepuscular and crepuscular video is the best way to visualize that I've seen. It's really, really a hard concept to wrap your mind around. And interestingly enough, there had been buzz about a story a few days ago, blue beams in the sky seen in the Houston, Texas area. And Dabu put a video out on this. I don't know if either of you came across that, but it was really striking. It's exactly how in your video you show pictures, photos of anti-crepuscular rays. And actually, there was a story that came out in the news. I do have that. It was on Eyewitness News website, ABC, and they explained it as crepuscular, and that was great because I saw that and I recognized that. But then they went on to say it also proved the curve of the earth.
Yeah, of course.
And so I was excited to see your video again because it's been, since originally I used to keep up with everything, right as they'd come out. So it was really great. I was even going to send out an email on that yesterday, and I knew I was missing something because I was just saying, no, they got it all wrong. And, but I didn't have that piece, which is how you explain it. And you do a really great job. So, but it's still hard for me, but absolutely. I highly recommend anybody's having a tough time because it explains it. We've got this ingrained in our minds how things work from a globular perspective, and you explain it so well. So I'm really excited. I'll zip you over this article. You might be interested to see. Somebody needs to do a response to this because they took the chance, they took that chance to say it's because of the curve of the earth, and it has nothing to do with that.
Well, this might be your next video, Mike.
Yeah, I'd have to see what that is. I'm not sure what that is you're talking about, but yeah, it's a big one. Perspective is real. Even my my YouTube, what do you call your picture avatar, is shows a hallway like with the ground ramping up and the ceiling angling down to your eye level perspective. And we know perspective is real. The argument's whether the earth's a ball or it's flat or anything else, but perspective is real. When you go outside, one of the biggest things is to go outside and look at the clouds and try to get a nice shot, where you get a clear view to the horizon, and you can only see maybe 30, 40 miles of clouds. Last time I was driving on a highway on a couple-hour trip, I would look at clouds in the distance and see how long it took me to get under the clouds, and it would take like maybe 5 minutes, and or 10 minutes, and so I could estimate how far maybe those clouds were. Assuming they weren't moving very fast. But anyway, it was interesting. But when you go out and you see clouds, they converge with the ground. You can't see thousands of miles of clouds. You can't see hundreds of miles of clouds. You may only see 30, 40 miles of clouds, and that's it. They merge with the horizon, with the ground, and they don't start to tip over, and so that you're not seeing the underside of the clouds as they go over any curve. You're just seeing the perspective produced angling down toward the horizon.
Right. I would add this, since we're talking about this. If the sun were 93 million miles away, we wouldn't even see it because the sun rays don't travel that distance. And so for people that buy into that and believe it, there is a limit. You know how they say, according to science, that the sun rays travel all this and that they cover an infinite amount of distance, and that, they can travel over millions and millions of miles or light years or whatever. But that's not true. There is an infinite. The sun's rays aren't infinite in, being able to cross over time and space and dimension. And so.
Right, in my crepuscular sunray video, not the anti-crepuscular southern rotation video, but I have another video a few videos back about crepuscular rays, and I say that briefly in there too. I agree that we probably wouldn't even see the sun. It would just be a blob of light, on the other side of the horizon. On the other side of the atmosphere, if in fact it were as far away and as big as they say it is. How come we see it so clear?
Right,
exactly. Like it's right here. That doesn't quite make sense. But.
Right. And so before we go into this, and I did post link to those two videos that I wanted everybody to look at. We're getting a lot of feedback from your mic, Michael, so maybe pull it just a little bit away from you. Yeah, we're hearing a lot of I don't know what you're doing in the background, but there's a lot of feedback coming from it. Okay, so anyways, let's talk about your journey to awakening before we get into these particular topics and perspectives. How was it? What brought you into awakening, and were there other things, like was 9/11 a catalyst for you in, basically looking into and studying all of these esoteric subjects, and how also were you led to flat earth?
Yeah, no, actually, 9/11, I was one of the brain dead that thought, I believed the whole story. So that didn't get me. What happened was in 2006, uh, somebody I know was talking about evolution, and they were talking about a book called Darwin's Black Box by Michael Behe, and they were arguing with an evolutionist, this person I know. And so I was fascinated. I didn't even know this was an argument. I was like, wow, I didn't know this, people were, debating this stuff. So I started looking on YouTube, and I found Kent Hovind. And this was, I don't know if you know the story about him, but anyway, this is before he had his issues. But I started watching every video that I could of his and practically memorized them all. And so at some point, about 3 years ago, maybe, I just started looking deeper. I was like, I kept looking for some new stuff because I felt like I had almost all his stuff memorized, and I was like, okay, what else is out there? And I kept seeing the flat earth stuff, as recommendations for videos on the side. And I was like, no, that's ridiculous.
Right.
Flat earth. I mean, I was like, you got to be kidding. I don't even want to go there. And eventually at some point I clicked, and I got onto somebody named, his name is Henning Kellogg, Iowa, or it's Henning Kellogg, IA. I called him Henning Kalogia, just because that's what his name looked like, But anyway, so I watched a bunch of his stuff, and I just started getting into it, and I was like, wow, like I said, I was on board, except for how does the sun, and then how does the sun rise and set, and then once I figured out that, I kept hearing people say, well, the killer of the flat earth is the southern star rotation. That's an impossibility. They can't explain that one. And so for the longest time, I was just like, I guess it took me a year to get the confidence to understand it enough that I just I'm going to make a video, because I see too many people getting turned off to flat earth. I've spoken to a lot of people that say, well, I was into it, but this southern star rotation is the killer. You can't, nobody can explain that. And so I was like, I just kept thinking about it. And then the crepuscular ray thing hit me. I was like, wait a minute, there's an example in nature that we see. The sun is 6,000 miles away. If let's say it's rising on your eastern horizon, these crepuscular rays diverge out from the sun, they come up overhead, and then they converge on the opposite horizon. And that's all due to the observer. Without an observer, that's not what it would look like. The rays would just keep spreading out. But because of the observers in the scene, each one of us sees the rays converge. And being that each one of us sees the rays converge, that's also how I explain how Sigma Octantis could sit on the horizon still for each person seeing it. Because once, I believe that all the stars do rotate around a northern celestial center. And so Sigma Octantis would be no different, and it would be just like the anti-crepuscular rays apparently converge 12,000 miles from the sun when the sun's on the horizon. When Polaris is on the northern horizon, there would also be a convergence. And I get so many people go, oh, wait a minute, what are you talking about? The stars don't shoot out light beams. Your analogy is ridiculous. And it's like, no, not really. If you superimpose my sunbeams over the stars, they're both rigid rotating bodies, essentially. When I do that thing where I connect the rays to the sun and rotate, the stars are basically rigid rotating bodies in the flat earth model too. So if I superimpose the rays over the stars, the stars that are inside each ray would stay exactly where they are. So why wouldn't they converge as well? And, the other question might be, well, if they converge, then why don't they all shrink to a dot? That's a hard one too, except for I have another video that I haven't put out yet. I have it pretty well made, and I've touched on it in my, I think it's in the crepuscular sunray video. I touch on it as far as I call it celestial perspective, but it has to do with objects that are further away from your eye line. Your eye line, or your z-axis, is anything that moves away from you on your eye line. Like if you're standing next to a train on a train track and the train goes away from you, it's going to rapidly shrink as it goes away, because there's only one movement you're seeing, and that's shrinking. You're not seeing it moving laterally or vertically out of that plane, right? But if you were to raise that train up a mile overhead, now the train looks small. So now as it goes away from you, it doesn't shrink as much. And it actually, the higher each object, the higher the object is above you, the more steeply it converges downward. As you see in my video, I show the wall of wooden planks, and
Right.
they all diverge. And the higher they get, the more steep they get. The only one that's horizontal is the one in your eye line. The rest of them start moving more and more vertically as they go up. So anyway,
let's do this just to set the foundation, because I know for especially those that have not perused the videos, have not looked at it, that this is going to be, just way out there. But because in talking about this and understanding perspective, you really do need the visuals. And so we will, after the show, connect and link to those and provide that material. But let's try to make it understandable for those that are just listening in. And can you talk about just the way that the sun, why we see it rising and then moving up in arc towards, to the high point, which would be about high noon, and then it starts to move back down towards the horizon until it disappears when it reaches sunset. But it's not ever going below the horizon. It's just that's the perspective we see from the sun's movement as far as what we can visually conceive, the limits of what we can visually conceive. And I think you said it's like a 12,000 mile range. And so if you would explain that, and also with the convergence, for those that don't have an idea, and I would say, like, explain it from your first video where you talked about how the guy sent you the mathematical equation and the sun was just going across the very top, as far as up in the sky, and then you were able to debunk that by showing the perspective and how the lines converge to a point both on the eastern and western horizon according to the movement of the sun over the course of a day.
Right. Yeah. This guy sent me this thing where he shows the maths, and he's drawing these angles to a sun that is correctly traveling parallel to the ground, but that's not visually correct. It may be, correct as far as you want to just draw some angles, but the reality is when I show that wall of parallel lines, which which converge, as they go away from you, you have to take that into account because those are parallel lines. And again, we don't have the visual. I could probably pull up a visual if we did a screen share type of thing, but I'm kind of new at this whole Skype thing, but
yeah, there's no visuals to this. And plus
I'm sharing a few screen grabs, at least in the chat room.
Great. Thank you so much, Kathy, for doing that. And also, let me make one other comment here. Like when you go to school, even in elementary or high school, and you go to art class, they teach you about this, as far as perspective in art and how it all converges to a point on the horizon. Just like when you're driving down the interstate, how the poles, the telephone poles, they all run in a line and they get smaller and smaller until they disappear on the horizon. It's the same kind of thing. And it's not that the telephone poles ever stop, because the more you drive on, you're going to reach more telephone poles that you can't see. It's just that we have a limit to what we are able to see with the naked eye.
Right. And what they teach in school is like mostly eye level, which is what we're used to. I mean, anything on your ground plane, maybe things like telephone poles are a little bit higher, or even how an airplane, which is, a few miles up. But we've never thought in terms of celestial objects. When you think of celestial objects, it's a completely different thing because they're so high, and if you see those convergent, those planks, those wooden planks in those couple videos you showed that you linked to, they progressively get more and more pointing downward as they go up. So, we've never been taught to even think of the sun, moon, and stars as far as being affected by perspective, because the ball model has been the paradigm for 500 years or whatever it is. And that's been, there's been no need for perspective to explain the movement of the sun, moon, and stars.
Right.
But in the flat earth model, which I believe is the real and correct thing we live under, this is our reality.
I agree.
You have to know perspective, and it's not so. Everybody comes to my channel, so many people, and they say, yeah, but everything that goes away from you shrinks to a dot, and we don't see the sun do that. And then I always have to talk about, well, but when it's something moving away on your eye line or on your z-axis, yes, that will shrink rapidly. But if it's parallel to that, and now the height at which it moves away, the shrinkage is commensurate to the distance away from your eye line. So the higher it is, the less it shrinks as it goes away. Now I have something that I did. I have video of it. I haven't put a video out yet, but I have two balls that are the same size. They're like 4-inch diameter wiffle balls. And I put them on the floor about 6 feet apart. And I put my camera on the ground about a foot behind one of the balls. And so then I lined up the camera and the two balls into a straight line so that I couldn't see the far ball because it was being blocked by the near ball, right? So as I moved the camera up, I just got it where the far ball was now in frame with the near ball. Mm-hmm. Now the far ball is 6 feet away from the near ball, and it's a total of 7 feet from the camera because I'm a foot behind this ball. Well, anyway, the far ball is about 1/10 the size or diameter of the near ball. So it's shrunk considerably. But so now I take my camera, and anybody can do this at home to try this out. I took my camera and raise it up about 7 feet off the ground so that staying over the same spot. And now get both balls in view, and the far ball is about half the diameter. In other words, it hasn't shrunk nearly as much. And so what I'm proposing, a lot of people say, oh, you're making up a perspective. Okay, well, maybe I am. Maybe because nobody's ever thought of perspective, in terms of celestial objects. And so, but the higher you get, the less that object shrinks. Right? So at some point, if I go higher than 7 feet, I keep going higher and higher and higher. Those two balls are going to look the same size. They're going to be indiscernibly different or the same. They're not going to look different at all. They're going to look the same size. And so that's the phenomenon. That's why the sun and these celestial objects don't shrink, or at least it's an explanation, I believe, why they don't shrink like people think they do, because everybody's just thinking in terms of perspective that we learn in art class, that, objects moving away from you shrink, but not when they're parallel to you. And the further they are away from you parallel, the less and less they shrink. And you can prove that by, like I said, just do that little demonstration with two like-size objects.
Yeah, that's a really cool experiment. I would also say, because I get asked about why is sometimes we see the sun vary in size when it's even during sunrise and sunset, that sometimes it is a very much larger, and it doesn't disappear as a small point of light. And my explanation for this is that the sun itself is moving. And like, if, for instance, if you were a viewer and you were located on the equator, the sun would be very much larger when it is actually located directly above you, which would be during the spring equinox or the autumnal equinox. And then the sun moves in distance towards the Tropic of Cancer for the summer solstice. And when it is located above the Tropic of Cancer for summer solstice, it will appear smaller because it will be the furthest away from the viewer at the equator. But for a person that's near the Arctic, the sun would be very much larger during sunrise and sunset. And the same phenomena would occur for, like, for instance, the winter solstice. The person that's seated on the equator would see the winter solstice sun as similar to what it would see as far as the summer solstice sun, but the person that's up in the Arctic regions would not even see the sunrise at all because it would be so far away from them that it would never enter in that person's view. And so this, the differentiation of where the sun is according to its movement back and forth between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn also affects the size of the sun during sunrise and sunset, and also perspective.
That would be interesting to see if somebody could document that. The only thing I've seen is a couple people have given me pictures. Phuket Word actually did a video on this, where he did filtering on the sun, and the sun shrinks. Now, somebody else, a ball earther, also gave me some pictures, and he was claiming the sun didn't shrink, but it showed the same exact thing, in that the sun, when it was overhead, and then he took a picture with the filter when it was at the horizon, and it had the same diameter as far as its horizontal diameter, but its vertical diameter was smaller. It was almost like maybe not quite 3/4, but almost 3/4. So it kind of squashed a little bit. Now, I don't know, what atmospheric or illusory things were going on there, but anyway, they both had the same picture. So
hold on, brother. We're at the first break. We'll be right back, everyone. All right, welcome back, everybody. I wanted to let everyone know also that as far as our website, the Truth Seeking Network, fallenangels.tv, that for some reason people are not able to gain access to it right now. And so I do know, and I appreciate your patience with it. For whatever reason, it's been my computer, it's been the server, and now it's the network. So I'm going to try to find resolution sometime Monday, and hopefully we'll get it back up as soon as we can. And I want to also thank Kathy for doing such an awesome job and sharing all of her incredible information over there. It just seems very weird how, there keeps being issues with all of that. And so want to give you a chance, Michael, to go back and to finish up your comment, what you were talking about before we went to break there.
Yeah, it's just about, so I've seen these pictures, and they've used filters on the sun, and they show that it's vertically had a little bit of a shrinkage, or it's gotten smaller from top to bottom, but from left to right, it has maintained its size. But overall, you'd have to say, well, it looks a little bit smaller. I mean, because the circumference is now smaller. If the left to right is the same size, but top to bottom is smaller, its circumference is smaller. But whether that's an illusion, I don't know. But I don't even know that the sun would shrink or not. Now, a lot of stuff that you see of the sun would have to do with, I think it's blooming or lens flare or whatever, and that can make the sun appear to get bigger as it comes towards you, and stuff like that. So, and as it sets, more of the light is filtered out by the atmosphere and the and stuff. So a lot of times you see the sun get small as it goes over the horizon. So it's hard to really tell. One thing, I tried to find video time-lapse, like on my time-lapse of the sun video, I have a lot of pretty lengthy time-lapse. It looks like it goes from sunrise to about 10, 11 in the morning. I mean, it's coming at you pretty long time, a good 5 hours or so. But I can't find any with a filter on it. A time lapse, I'll see, like maybe they show a few minutes of it at the horizon, but I don't know if you've looked for that, but I can't find any of it.
No, I haven't. All the time lapse that I've been looking at in studying this topic, as far as the with the southern latitudes and the motion of the stars being in opposite direction, I've just really been looking at the star trails and the time lapse from the different hemispheres. And there's one video that's really interesting, because the individual that shoots video from the southern latitudes, he shows all four perspectives. He shows what it looks like when you're looking towards the north, which is, the same thing. The stars move in the same way as if you're looking directly at Polaris. And then looking towards the east, it shows the stars beginning to move downwards. And when you look to the west, the same thing. At the end of the horizon, the stars start to move downwards. But when you look south, the stars are moving in opposite direction, and then they get smaller and smaller, just like we were talking about, as if the stars appeared in, like, almost like they're moving in circle around Sigma Sautanus. And so looking at all of that and studying all of that, I was basically just praying for understanding on how to make sense of all this, because it was a conundrum and it was something that I was not able to explain because I've only really studied the flat earth and the knowledge of it from scripture. And so tying it together with the visual observation of what we see in world, that was something that, is necessary because we want to be able to understand what is visually manifest in the creation. Because, if you can't explain what you can see in the creation, how do you apply that to a model for new, for understanding it in different way? And so all of it has to tie together.
I'll give you a good, easy one too, to help you, get people to have confidence that it is a perspective produced and phenomenon that we see with the southern stars. Because one objection I get, they say, well, how is it that we all see the same stars when we're looking south? South on a flat earth is in all different directions, 360 degrees. So how is it we'd see the same stars? And so I say in my last video, I say, well, we all see the same sun, right? And the reason we see the same sun is because the sun circles around to each of ours daytimes. Well, the stars circle around to each other's nighttime. So whether you're in Australia or Africa or wherever, as the stars rotate around, your nighttime, you're going to see the same stars as someone on the other side looking the opposite direction, south,
Exactly.
So that's one way I like to say that. So, well, we all see the same sun, right? So, and then the other one is, how does Sigma Octantis remain in one spot? How does it look like it remains in one spot? And that's why I connected the sun rays to the sun and show the anti-convergence on the opposite horizon, and to show now without an observer present, those sun rays that are diverging out from the sun would continue to diverge out. And I show that in the video too. This is what it would look like if it didn't converge. And if I asked you to look out at and follow one of those rays, where would it point? You might point way out, in the wrong direction. I'll say no, because they converge. They would all converge to a center point. And that's hard to understand, but I try to show, I break it up into a hemisphere, 180 degree hemisphere. So as you're looking south on a flat earth, and the stars rotate around from your left to your right, and let's call the 180 degree hemisphere from your looking straight left, looking straight right, and then all the area in between to the front of you. That's 180 degrees. Well, as soon as Sigma Octantis enters your field of view, which would be, let's say it's moving around from the left, right? It's circling around. Being that we see the crepuscular rays converge, even though it's circling, you wouldn't see it there. You would see it dead straight ahead as a fixed object and the other stars circling around it. Again, I agree with you. This is a tough concept to understand without visuals. So in my anti-crepuscular sun rays and the southern star rotation, I have some illustrations and visuals and stuff, but that's how it works though. So even though it's cruising across my 180 degree field of view, you would think that's what you're going to see, but you're not going to see that because everything converges at that exact distance that Sigma Octantis is, just like the crepuscular rays converge at a point as well, the anti-crepuscular rays. And anyway, so it's something that was a conundrum and was a hard thing to understand and was a big problem for a lot of people. Now I don't see it as a problem at all. I see it's perfectly in line with perspective, and it still doesn't make sense to a lot of people. But another way to look at it is Polaris is like a big umbrella, right? And let's say you're standing at the North Pole, and the umbrella spines would come all the way down to the ground. That would be a perspective, and all the stars would be rotating just above the horizon from your left to your right. But as you move toward the equator, let's say you move south, Polaris will now tip down, and it'll keep tipping. And let's say you go all the way to the equator. Polaris will now be on your northern horizon, right on the ground, and those spines of your umbrella will stretch out over your head, spreading out, and then reconverge on the other horizon. So you take those spines and you kind of gather them together in your hand. You can picture that, and you've gathered them over on your southern horizon, and now rotate the whole thing. That's all that happens. It's a perspective. issue. It's not the reality, because if there's no observer there, all the stars do would be actually moving from your left to your right, and you would see them sweeping across your field of view from left to right as you look south. But being that you are the observer, and the way perspective works, it would converge them, and we have that proof with crepuscular and anti-crepuscular rays. If we didn't have that, then I'd say, yeah, that's crazy. But we have it, we see it. It's something in nature that we can observe.
Right. And you have to take that into account. This is how perspective works according to what is observable in nature. And so you have to understand it with that, by applying that principle to what you are actually seeing. And so let's elaborate just a little bit further. And Kathy, if you have any questions, or if there's any questions in the chat room, feel free to jump in. But I want to explain just a little bit more as far as the dome and how it's spread out, and the way that because when you go to the equator and you look up, that's where the celestial ecliptic is. And because, like, if you look at you're looking at the enclosed world system, and as you said, an umbrella, that the dome would represent an umbrella. It would cover the wide circle, the full expanse of the earth. And so as you begin to move south, then the stars start to tip. And then once you're at the equator, the Polaris would be on the northern horizon. And so everything would move, from east to west in a seemingly straight line, because that's where you are at the equator, and the equator will divide the vaulted dome exactly in half. And then the southern portion of the rest of the vaulted dome, because it is of so much larger size than, say, if you divided the upper portion of the top half of the dome, the concentric rings would be a lot smaller than they are in the southern portion of the vaulted dome. And so when you apply the larger concentric rings, that's what actually gives you, in looking south, it makes it appear as if the stars are bending back towards the other direction. And then we see again that convergence in the southern latitudes, and this is why we see the stars seemingly to move in the opposite direction when you're looking south. But it's all because of the visual perspective that, you have to apply all that again according to what we say. And then one last thing, crepuscular, when you look that up, it just means in regard to twilight. And so the crepuscular rays are what, you can see them during twilight. And so that's why they're called crepuscular rays, for those that are interested in that. All right, back to you, Michael.
Right. And speaking of the dome, you're referring to like the biblical dome.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, really, it's twofold. Our vision creates a dome in that perspective. If you stand outside, the clouds that are overhead are the highest, just like telephone poles. If you stand in a row of telephone poles that stretches for 100 miles and you're right in the middle, about 50 miles in, the pole right overhead is going to be the highest. And as you look out, they're going to lower. They're going to start, converging down and angling down toward the ground. Well, the clouds do the same thing. And it's kind of a dome in that it's not a sharp line like an A-frame roof on a house. With like crepuscular rays, you can see that they kind of arc. They come over. They don't come in a straight line and stop, or at least it doesn't appear that way. It may in fact do that, but appears more arced, as it comes overhead. So we have that double dome. We have a perspective dome, and then we have an actual dome, and
right.
and how that affects perspective. And at that point, that's a wild card. Anything can happen with that. If in fact the sun, moon, and stars are within that dome, Job calls it as a strong, like a molten looking glass.
Right.
If that's the case, then other phenomenon, can take place. That we're just never going to know for sure. But perspective's real. We can see it in the clouds and the telephone poles, and whatever. And like that wall of lines, I love that wall of lines that I have, the wall of wooden planks, because as I show, the higher they are, the steeper they get. And interestingly enough, from your perspective, the perspective of the camera in this particular instance, all of the lines on the other side away from you come to a point. They all come to like a hub of a wheel, right?
Right.
Which is crazy, but visually that's what they do. Because I lined them up, I put lines on them, and they all line up to an exact point, just like the hub of a wheel. So,
right. Also, I want to explain this because people ask this as well. The sun, what we see as being our day, when the sun rises in the east and then sets in the west, the sun is actually never moving closer to the horizon. It maintains its circuit above the face of the earth. But because of the way that perspective works, that's when we can actually see the sun enter into our field of vision. That's what gives us prospectively sunrise.
right.
But it's not that it's actually coming up from the horizon. It's at the same distance above the earth as it is in its full revolution above the face of the earth. It's just that when it enters into our field of vision and we can then see it with our naked eye, that's what causes us prospectively to see the sun rise. And then as it moves in arc across the sky, we see it moving, almost in semicircle arc until it reaches the western horizon, and it starts to go down towards the horizon until it reaches the horizon. And when it reaches the horizon, that is the point where it leaves our field of view, our perspective, and our being able to see it with the naked eye. And then it actually, for those that are on the opposite side of the plane of the earth, they'll see it as sunrise over there.
That's right. I love to think of it like that. When we're seeing our sun, wherever you are, and you see the sunset, someone 6 hours west of you,
yes,
it could be noon. It's noon for them. It's right overhead. And someone 12 hours west of you, your sunset is their sunrise.
Exactly.
How crazy is that? You know? But I love it. But that's exactly how it would work. I mean, the perspective lines are real. You can't debate that. I mean, you can go look at any wall of parallel lines or look at anything. They all converge. That's just the way it works.
Right. And there's evidence of this as well with the midnight sun as phenomena. When the sun is located near the Tropic of Cancer and it has such a small, a really tight revolution, you can actually take video of it moving from the east to the south to the west and back to the north and back to the east in full revolution without it ever reaching the horizon. And so it shows you with the way that it moves that yes, the sun is moving in circle, and that's the way that it moves above the face of the earth. And it just, when it starts to move south after it reaches the Tropic of Cancer, it just widens its revolution until it continues on to the Tropic of Capricorn.
Yeah, I do a nice, I have a little video clip illustration or animation in my time lapse of the sun video where I show that from a place in Alaska, this video was apparently shot, and it shows the midnight sun, and it goes up and it goes down and it comes up and it comes down. And it's like, so I explained the reason it comes up and down is because the observer is not dead center in the middle of the circle. You'd have to be at the North Pole to be dead center. So if you're not dead center, the way perspective works, if the sun is further away from you, it's lower in the sky. If it's closer, it's higher. So if you're not dead center and that sun circles around you, it'll be closer on one end and further away on the other. So when it's further away, it's going to lower visually, and when it's closer to you, it's going to rise. So that's why the sun bobs up and down in a weave, like, you know. And,
and if you were at the exact North Pole, you would see the sun move exactly level.
to the
in
to the
all
horizon.
directions. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly level to the horizon in all directions.
Now, another one people say is, well, how is it that during equinox or solstice, the sun rises due east and sets due west on the equator? Well, I use the umbrella thing again. The umbrella is the celestial sphere, so to speak, right? So if you tip that down where Polaris is now
Right.
on the northern horizon, the sun is also circling around Polaris. So if you take that big umbrella and you stretch it all the way across and then reconverge those spines down on your southern horizon so that, you have two convergence, one in the north and one in the south now, and if the sun is moving at an equal distance away from Polaris in a circle around Polaris, that would be, if you took that umbrella and now looked at it, right face onto it, and you held both ends in your hands and you had it out in front of you, the sun would rise due east. It would be a straight line. It would
Right.
rise due east and set due west. And that's a hard one to get. It's like, wait a minute. No, the sun is circling. How can it look like it's rising due east and setting due west? Well, again, with the crepuscular rays, I show in the video that if we rotate it and if we marked a spot on those crepuscular rays that was an equal 6,000 miles away from the sun, which would be the sun over the equator, analogous to that. But anyway, so whatever was moving on 6,000 miles from the sun, if we painted on that little umbrella going over those crepuscular rays, it would rise due east, come in an exact straight line overhead, and set due west. That's
Right.
perfectly explainable
Right.
with perspective. As crazy as it sounds and hard to understand, but people got to get this to understand the flat earth and to believe that it's a reality.
Right. And the proof that it's not moving, because I know some people say that it moves in a straight line, but proof that it's not moving in a straight line is it rising, because again, it's entering our perspective and then it goes in an arc, in a semicircle arc towards the sunset, and then it sets when it moves away from our perspective. If it was moving in a straight line, we would never, if it was on the horizon, we would never see it rise up above the horizon. But because it does, we know that it's moving in that circular revolution, and that's why we see it move up in the skies and then back down towards the horizon when it sets for sunset.
Right. Like most of the time where I live, the sun rises in the southeast. In the northeast, arcs up over the southern sky and sets back down in the northwest. So it's kind of like if you take a hula hoop and you have a hula hoop around you and you just tip it about 45 degrees, get whatever the degrees are. I don't know for sure, but anyway, and have half the hula hoop below the ground and half above the ground. So the sun would follow that hula hoop. So it's essentially, it's a straight line as far as, like a hula hoop is a straight line, but it's coming up and coming over in that arc. But actually it doesn't arc. Now this is an interesting thing. In the ball model, if the sun is moving due to the rotation of the earth, then you would, and I've done an animation, I didn't include it in one of my videos, but the ball sun would appear to arc in a convex arc, right? Like a ball. It would arc over your head. But in all the video that I have, and I think in my last video I included a sunset, and I put a line on it. I think it's in the anti-crepuscular Southern Star Rotation video. And while I'm talking or something, I show a sunset, a time-lapse sunset, and I trace a line behind the sun, and it's a dead straight line. It's not an arc.
Right. Well, I realize that, but I mean, because you show it, it's like a triangle, the way that it moves as far as moving up and down, but that's the way we see it. That's the way we see it.
Wherever the observer is, you're under the center of that TV.
Yes,
you're under the center of that A-frame, and everything moves in an A-frame. And the higher it is, the steeper the A-frame. If you know what I mean, A-frame housing, A-frame roof.
Right.
And so everybody is always at the center underneath, or I like to look at it too as a big circus tent. Everybody is at the center post of their own circus tent. That's how perspective works for objects that are high up in the sky. Anything away from your parallel to your z-axis.
Right. Yeah. Now, what I was saying is that we know because of the midnight sun phenomena that the sun is moving in circle in its revolution, but we
Correct.
see it as you said, an A-frame, as a pyramid. It rises from the eastern horizon, moves up like a diamond towards the top of the pyramid, and then moves back down in
Right.
convergence until it reaches the horizon for sunset.
So it's the circling plus, I kind of look at it as circling plus the up and down of perspective. Perspective causes the rising and the lowering. And when you couple that with the circling, then you get that slanted hula hoop, take it, tip it.
Yes,
That's,
exactly.
it's arcing, yet it's going in a, straight line up and over visually from our perspective.
Right. And let's talk about this as well, because I was talking about why it is that we see, from southern latitudes, whether it's from Australia or South America or the southern tip of Africa, because that's not the end of where the vaulted dome actually meets with in union with the circle of the earth. And so those stars, Sigma, Octanus, and you were even saying that you think there might even be other stars further, we don't know, but from those southern latitudes, the reason you see all of those stars moving in actually, we'll pick it up on the other side. We'll be right back, everyone. Buddy, for second hour, there's a question from the chat room from Link. She asks, are these actual stars outside of the dome? Which is a really good question, especially for people that don't understand. And the answer is no. All of these stars, the sun, the moon, and the heavenly luminaries when they were created, they were placed in the firmament. And also the book of Enoch describes there being 7 concentric rings where the stars and what are called the 7 planets of the universe, according to the Sefer Yetzirah, the book of creation, it names the sun, the moon, Venus, Mercury, Mars, Saturn, and Jupiter as the 7 planets of the universe, and that these planets all move in their own concentric ring, but together they make up what we see as, all these celestial luminaries moving in circle around Polaris. And Polaris is the fixed star of the celestial night, and it's the point where all of the other stars move in circle around. It's the very center of the vaulted dome, and that's also where the Most High God has established his throne, is directly above Polaris, which makes sense because that is the central height of the vaulted dome, and it's as far as strategic location, it's the place where you can see all the other aspects of the Earth's circular plane as laid out below you. Did you want to comment on that, Michael?
No, that's pretty good. I imagine if he's up there, well, God could see whatever, but maybe the dome also magnifies and allows him to see everything. I don't know.
Yeah,
I
I actually thought about that too, because it is transparent, and it's, whether it has, not that he would need that ability,
right.
but most certainly it could be, that the vaulted dome does magnify and maybe allows the angels in looking down at the world and examining the happenings here to help them to keep close view. Yes, Kathy.
Bev had another question, and it's one I've never thought of. Outside of the dome or the firmament, would time be the same as it is for us?
That's a very good question. I think, that time is relative, especially here, but that everything as far as the universe happens on an eternal moment. Like everything is happening in the moment. Like there's no future, no past. It's like everything is right now. But again, who really knows? But as far as the representation of time here, it's linear. We see past, present, and future all converging on one long timeline, and that we live in the present in order to get to the future, but that the past and the present are connected by what's going on right here, right now, if that makes any sense.
I'll give you one. I think that
Sure.
that God refers to himself as I am.
Yeah.
Right? I always thought that was kind of weird. He told Moses to tell him, I am sent you.
Yes. I am
And
that
so,
I am. Yes.
so God is, we're not, right? I think
Right.
God is in the present, we're not. Like,
Right.
every word coming out of my mouth right now, as I speak, it's in the past.
Yes.
So if there is a present here on earth, it's so very short, I would have to like clap my hands and go, okay, is that the present? Let's analyze that. Well, that clap lasted a tenth of a second, right? Well, a second breaks up into hundreds of seconds or thousands of a second. So let's go to the very left side of that clap. If you've stretched it out on some kind of meter that you could look at it, well, the very, very left hand of it would be the present and the rest of it would be past as it went past. So let's stretch that present out. And again, you can subdivide it. You can keep dividing. I don't know that you can ever get to the present here on earth. That's why God is present. So I believe the reason that part of his omniscience is that he knows everything that's going to take place because it's already happened.
Exactly.
Right?
All at
So
the same time.
He's outside of time.
Yes.
And so a lot of people say, well, wait, how do we have free will if everything has already been done? Well, everything's already been done, but you had free will while you were doing it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And
Right.
so,
Exactly.
So yes, even though right now whatever changes you make, you say, well, I'm gonna mess with the reality as or this snapshot of the world that God sees. I'm gonna mess with it. Well, he already knew you were gonna mess with it. You already messed with it in the world that he has a snapshot of. Why he can tell the beginning from the end. That's part of why he says you'll know that I'm God, because I can tell you the beginning of the story from the end.
Exactly.
I can prophesy. I can tell you future events, and they happen to a T, just as I said they would, because he's already seen it. Even though we can right now contemplate, well, I'm gonna throw a monkey wrench in that. I'm gonna change something. Well, he's already figured that it's already happened.
Right.
So whatever change those people maybe back then already thought, or us in our lives already thought of, well, I'm gonna change. I'm gonna do something different. Well, it doesn't matter if you changed it because it already happened and it's recorded.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. And here's the other thing too, and this is why, in my opinion, you can see the presence of God in different holy scriptures and passages, is because he is being outside of time. He can tell you the end from the beginning, and he can put it in the gospel, in his prophetic word. Right. Exactly, prophecy. And so that is a connecting link to let us know that indeed the Most High God authored that, whether it was through prophet or whether he dictated it like the Pentateuch to Moses, because we see those prophecies contained within, and things like flat earth as knowledge being encoded into the scriptures. Those kind of things affirm that those materials were absolutely divinely inspired. And so that lets us know that it had to have been authored by an omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent God who is outside of time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's why, for those that, because a lot of people still buy into a lot of the pagan mythologies, and yet the reason I affirm the Gospels as true is because of their prophetic nature. And so,
I always like how Chuck Missler describes that. It's kind of like he's overseeing a parade and he sees the beginning of the parade to the end of the parade, everything that's happening in between, where we would take part and be in the moment at each point.
Right.
But he sees it all, and that's, prophecy is a perfect example.
Yes.
There was another question. I think this is a good one. People ask these questions all the time. What do you think about wormholes or black holes? Are those a real thing, or what do you think about those?
I do think they are a real thing, only because it even says, like in the Emerald Tablets, it speaks about these interdimensional beings, and that, like even Satan, he doesn't have the omnipresence of the Most High God, but he's able to, like, utilizing remote viewing or these other techniques, they're able to get a glimpse, but they don't know 100%, like God does. But that they are able to use techniques, magical techniques, to get an idea of things that might happen in the future. And so they are, even like with the clairvoyance and people using crystal balls, like not Michelangelo, but the Nostradamus, with the way that whatever technique he was using, they said, staring into the water or whatever, and being able to see visions of the future, those kind of things. And so there are techniques, magical techniques, which the occultists use to get a glimpse into, prophecy and clairvoyance. But the Most High God doesn't need to have any kind of tool or technique. He knows because he's God.
There's another question in chat kind of along with that. Knowing that God has seen everything past, present, and future, do you think he knew Satan would fall when God created the angels?
Absolutely. And, I was just writing most recently about this story, because the way that I look at it is like God created Lucifer, and he was like he was the first created angel according to the Gospel of Bartholomew. And then because he was so powerful, and because he thought he was godlike, he thought he could even overthrow his maker, and that he wanted to be as God himself. And because God can read all our minds and knows all of our thoughts, he saw what Lucifer was planning, and that he had wanted to overthrow God. And so that's why he and the 1/3 of the angels that decided to be as gods themselves were cast out of the heavens. And since they were cast out of the heavens, they had a plan to corrupt the seed line of humanity, which is why Satan caused Adam and Eve to fall, beguiling Eve. He impregnated her with Cain and created his own bloodline. And so now we see here on the earth the enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent as it is playing out. And that this is the reason why Christ, as the Son of God, had to come into the flesh in order to purify the bloodline and to cleanse, to rectify the fall. And so this is the wager. I call it the great contest. This is the battle of what was the war in heaven, which is now the enmity between the seed lines as it unfolds here on the earth. And so I'm actually writing something about all that, but this is why we see in the parable of the wheat and the tares, Yeshua talking about the enemy that snuck into the garden, that sowed the tares, and how both would be allowed to grow up until the time of the end. And so we have these two bloodlines at war with one another, except for the sons of God. I mean, the sons of Adam don't know about the sons of Cain. Most people don't know about the sons of Cain. And so they've been ruling and manipulating and causing problems from the shadows, because they're hiding, and they're clandestinely doing all of these things. But their time is almost up. Anyways, Michael, I want to give you a chance to. I want to talk about some of the other things that you learned in study of the flat Earth, and just opening your mind. What were some of the other dilemmas, and how was it that you came to know this as truth? What were the different steps, the different things you began to look into? No curvature, the earth not moving. I mean, what were the particulars?
Yeah, just started. You do a lot of thinking. You got to think about this stuff a lot, especially the perspective. It's a mind twister to understand it.
Right.
So yeah, I've just done a lot of thinking. And I had done some research on satellites when I became a geocentrist before I became a flat earther. So I was looking into, how do the geostationary satellites work?
Right.
And so lost my train there where I was going with that, but
Well, just about the satellites. What do you think about the satellites? I mean, because in my mind, they're an impossibility. I mean, with the temperatures of the thermosphere, and because the Earth is not a ball, there's no way they could be constantly falling in order to maintain an orbit.
right, yeah, I know I do not believe they're up there, because like a lot of people, and I've seen video on YouTube where they show the quote unquote ISS going overhead, right, and it's a light, right, so if there's tens of thousands of satellites up there. I don't know the
Right.
exact number, but I've heard one that was over 10,000 between low Earth orbit and high Earth orbit or geostationary altitude. But in low Earth orbit, there's, there's thousands, maybe under 10,000. But so where are they? Why isn't the sky glittering?
Right.
Right? Absolutely a glitter when you go outside and look. It should be sparkling,
Right.
but it's not. I don't see any. I see
Yeah.
no movement. Now, you might start to see something. They have, atmospheric drones up there now and stuff. There's a lot of stuff moving around up there. I mean, they've had drone technology for ages. But I don't see the, I don't buy it that the ISS, we can see that lit up, but where are all the other ones? There
Right.
should be little glitters of them up there. Don't see
Right.
them.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. According to as far as the altitude being those hundreds of miles or 1,000 miles up or whatever, we wouldn't be able to see even
Right.
the International Space Station at all. But as you said, if there's supposedly all these 10,000 or 20,000, I think is the number of the satellites they claim to be, how is it that, because they're not keeping track of their orbital path, how is it that they haven't run into each other, or there hasn't been one run into the International Space Station, and none of them have ever had to be fixed, and none of them,
And one more thing too, they're wrapped in gold glitter. I mean, not
Yeah.
gold glitter, in gold foil.
Right,
So we should be able to
exactly.
see them really great, reflecting,
Totally,
right?
right. Yeah, yeah. And then if you look at the temperatures for the thermosphere, it's beyond the point of the melting point for gold. So if they are made of these components, they would have already been destroyed as far as their they're being able to hold together in the manner that they were created.